What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another video. Today is going to be a little different. I'm going to be doing a longer video. I haven't done a longer video in a little while, but I wanted to talk about basically one of the largest inspirations in me being so passionate about history and wanting to create this type of content. And I'm sure you'll be able to tell by the title of this video what it's really going to be about. But basically, I just want to, take a second, anybody that is Polynesian watching this video, thank you for watching this video. Let me know what you think in the comments. I hope I don't come across as a dork or something like that. But I just wanted to share my thoughts and my experiences and essentially the impact that y'all's culture has had on me. So first and foremost, we'll address the fact that I'm not Polynesian. I'm from the Caribbean. I'm originally from an island called Boriken, which to most people is called Puerto Rico. But there's a reason why I don't like to call it that, because obviously I like to pay respect and homage to the indigenous culture, the indigenous name of the island. But nonetheless, essentially growing up, I had a very surface level understanding of the indigenous history of the Caribbean. I had a very milked down, watered down version of the history and just the indigenous connectivity of the island. The story was very simple. It was just basically, the Spanish showed up, these people were here, these people didn't make nothing, they didn't invent anything, they didn't do nothing. The Spanish wiped them out and they took it over, and the few of them that were left mixed with them, and everybody mixed, and then the Africans came and more people mixed, and then everybody's the same, everybody's mixed with everything, everybody's Puerto Rican national now. And that's a very oversimplified history of Puerto Rico and also all of the Caribbean islands, because it's actually much more complicated than that. But for the most part, the average individual person that you'll find in Boriken or any of the other islands talk about the history of the islands is basically just going to be that. And that really undermines, obviously, the indigenous contribution to the culture and to the genetic imprint, because ironically, Boriken or Puerto Rico has the highest level of indigenous blood left in the Greater Antilles. But with that being said, it's also, I would argue, one of the islands that least appropriately handles the responsibility of the cultural side of the indigenous impact, at least in terms of recognition, proper recognition, and kind of understanding, right? Because you'll see a lot of people in Puerto Rico that they have Taino tattoos, and people always have these same three symbols. It's always a sun, a coqui frog, or some type of swirl pattern, and they don't even know what they mean, and most of them don't even really care. It's just something that to them just, is an identifier of being Puerto Rican. A lot of them are not even aware enough of the fact that Taino people, indigenous Arawak people, did not just live in Puerto Rico, but that's neither here nor there for the sake of this video. I just wanted to kind of give the backdrop as to where my head was at growing up. It was kind of just like a gimmicky thing. It was just like, Taino, this and that, whatever. Who cares? I'm Puerto Rican. I'm super proud to have flags everywhere, this and that. That's how I grew up, just like everyone else there. And so when I was growing up, that kind of messed with my head a little bit when it came to, I guess, like a ethnic classification and stuff like that, because, obviously in the States, a lot of people from Spanish-speaking places always refer to themselves as Spanish and all this and that. And obviously, there's no denying that I have some Spanish ancestry, of course. But obviously, I do not look like a Spaniard. I don't look like somebody straight from Spain. So there is more to tell there, right? And it's interesting that this is not just an issue in the Spanish-speaking Caribbean islands. This is also an issue all over Latin America. People have a hard time accepting the fact that they have indigenous ancestry and stuff like that, and they kind of distance themselves from it. And I know it's not everybody, but I'm just talking in general for the sake of trying to lay the groundwork for where my head was at when I first encountered Polynesian culture and so on and so forth. And pretty much when I was growing up in my early childhood, I had no idea that Polynesian people even existed. It wasn't until I moved to Hawaii. And once I moved to Hawaii, that just opened my eyes to everything. I saw so many different groups of Polynesians. And upon moving there, apart from opening my eyes to this different culture and this different group of people from this side of the world that I never heard of before, it was crazy to me how I was embraced so quickly. I don't know, like I was showing up to people's barbecues and birthday parties and stuff that I didn't even know personally. They just gave me a plate of food, whatever. They didn't care because they thought that I was one of them. And I would often let people know that I'm not Polynesian, but some people wouldn't believe me. And it's just kind of funny to me because I, like I said, didn't really have like a core concept of like what I saw myself as in a racial sense, in a genetic sense. I was confused about that when I was a child. And so now being embraced by this group of people that have like a very distinctive indigenous culture to this region of the world, it pretty much inspired me to learn more about my heritage and my indigenous roots and my indigenous culture, right? Not too long after living there, I started to grow out my hair really long. And that was another thing that I was inspired to do because it was just a common thing in that Polynesian culture to have long hair, as a man and as a boy. So it was something that kind of opened my eyes to that because again, in the Puerto Rican culture, it's not that common unless you have braids and stuff like that sometimes. But for the most part, it's seen as like kind of unclean generally to just have loose long hair. Now it's changed a little bit, but I'm saying in general that's kind of how it was. The whole the look of the popular trendy stuff in Puerto Rico at the time was the short haircut and all this and that. And I know I got short hair now, but that's just because I had long hair for almost 4 years and I just wanted to try something different. But I will grow my hair back out again. I made a whole video about long hair. I'll leave that in the description below. But of course, I have no problem with having long hair. I just wanted to change it up a little bit. But back on the topic of the video. So many of these people that I never met before, they saw me and just immediately began to treat me like they've known me for an extended period of time. And it was an amazing feeling. It was an amazing experience. And on the note of me being mistaken for Polynesian by Polynesians themselves, that did not escape me. When I moved back to the States, especially with my big afro like this big, everybody thought that I was Polynesian. Everybody thought I was Samoan or Hawaiian. And to this very day, at work, I move around a lot at work. I'm at different stations and stuff like that all the time. So whenever I encounter new groups of people, guess what? Everybody thinks I'm Samoan. Everybody thinks I'm Polynesian. And I have to explain to everybody that I'm not. And still, they think that I'm lying to them. And they still call me Samoan. They call me Maui. I've been called Maui so many times, it's not even funny at this point. It's actually quite annoying. But I'm gonna circle back around to this whole thing about me being, misconstrued with being Polynesian. But real quick, I just want to circle back to the fact that I said that I was learning all about this Polynesian culture and trying to draw similarities about what I already knew about my indigenous heritage. And it kind of became like a playful little joke between me and some of my Polynesian friends because I always try to one up them with things that I would learn, new things I would learn from trying to study my indigenous ancestry, trying to learn more about the Arawak Taino culture of the Caribbean. And it was always like this little one-up game that we had, but it was always in good faith. It was never I was never demeaning their culture or nothing like that. I just wanted to be seen as cool and interesting as their culture was to me. So pretty much I was deep diving at school in the history of Hawaii and the history of all of these Polynesian islands, while also deep diving into the Taino culture and all of the history behind that and how they came from South America into the Caribbean and all that stuff. I was learning all this at the same time because I was just trying to I was trying to find a way to really resonate and present my indigenous heritage to the world, and in a positive light because it was a source of excitement and pride for me, a more genuine pride, I would say, than what I felt for, just the nationalistic idea of, oh yeah, I'm Puerto Rican, this and that, whatever. To me, that doesn't mean as much because to me, my worldview, like I said, was very much shaped by the worldview of the people that I read about in history. And that's just me personally. I'm not knocking anybody who is very prideful and all that of their nation, but it's just not me. And all this deep diving I was doing was further strengthened by one of my teachers, probably one of my greatest teachers I ever had in my entire life. His name was Mr. Carlson. I won't say his full name, but of course, I'm just going to say his name, Mr. Carlson. And Mr. Carlson was part Danish, Filipino, and Kanaka Maoli, of course. And he was probably the best history teacher I ever had, in the sense that I would stay after school with him. I didn't have any homework to do. I didn't have anything extra I needed to get done. I would just stay after school in his classroom while he helping out other people. he would take some time to come to me and literally tell me the history of Hawaii through his lens, outside of what's just in the history book. And that to me not only immortalized Mr. Carlson in my brain as a fantastic teacher, but also helped me get a perspective that was directly from someone that is extremely well studied about the history of the culture that they're very proud of. And that pretty much cemented to me in my brain, I need to be like this guy for my indigenous culture. And among the things we would discuss about, I would also bring the information I was learning from at home and kind of bring it to him. And we're over here drawing comparisons between the two cultures and how similar they were. To see these people from two opposite sides of the world have such similar ways of life is just fascinating. It's almost like the environment just shapes the type of culture, but even then the similarities just kind of over exceed just the standard understanding of that, because there are various islands in the world, but for some reason the Caribbean and the Polynesian culture is very, very similar, I would say. Some of the similarities that we discussed were the ahupua'a system and farming kalo, which is taro. It's their main ingredient and their main food source that they had. They were a very agricultural society, very similar to the Taino and Arawak people and the Kalinago people of the Caribbean. And the fact that they also had an agricultural system called the Conuco system, which was basically very similar to the ahupua'a. And the main root vegetable that held the Conuco together was the yuca root. So that's one of the very striking similarities. Also, a lot of the attire in Hawaii, they had the malo, and in the Caribbean, they had guayuco, which is a male covering that literally just covers, that part, and that's it, because it's hot and you're on an island and you're in the water all day and you're doing this, you're going up the mountain all day. It doesn't make sense to wear much clothing. Obviously, yeah, they did wear, different linens and things like that, shoulder shawls or cotton wraps on their arms and legs and stuff. But for the most part, the attire is very similar. And the attire is also kind of separated by class, which is another part that's very similar, is the system of the ali'i and the cacique in the Caribbean. They're very similar too, because they're the ruling class and they have a special attire that's only for them. The only headdresses worn in the Taino society was only by cacique class, and my cacique, the biggest chief that there is, he's going to have extra regalia. He's going to have a feathered cape. And obviously in Hawaii, the feathered cape is a very important symbol to the ali'i. And they had their various headdresses and their colors that meant different things. Same way to a lot of the Arawak cultures, very similar in that sense as well. Another big similarity between the two is the lack of metal work between the two. So pretty much in Hawaii, metal was pretty much non-existent. Their tools were predominantly made of koa, bones, teeth, and precious stones. And what's crazy is that the native Hawaiians had koa wood and the Taino had guayacan, which is also a very hard wood. So that's also, again, like I said, it's strikingly similar to two. Anyways, as I continued to live in Hawaii, I began wanting to learn Olelo Hawaii. And I started taking classes in Olelo Hawaii. And I actually learned quite a lot at the time, and I was very proud of learning this language. And I'm so glad that was an elective in my school, because I know that it's a language that's not spoken very much nowadays, obviously, and even among the indigenous population, unfortunately, the language is just kind of dying off with the older generation. But in the Caribbean, we don't have any sort of semblance of a conclusive, here is, a language that we can completely reconstruct it in its fullest, exactly how it was. We don't have that anymore. So I would just really hope that all Kanaka Maoli people would try to bring that back, keep that alive for as long as you can, because once it's gone, it's gone. It's going to be very hard to repurpose that and bring it back. And yeah, sadly, in the Caribbean, we don't have that. So it's very unfortunate, and I'm very jealous that Olelo Hawaii still exists, because jealous in a good way, because I do wish that we still had our original Arawaku language in the Caribbean, but it's no longer here. But what we do have in the Caribbean is some iconography and archaeology left behind to identify certain patterns and learn certain body attire and body painting styles and patterns and all of those things, right? But still to this day, a lot of Polynesian cultures still practice. Tatau is very popular among all Polynesian cultures. They all have their word for it. I just use the Samoan word for it because most of my friends were Samoan, so that's why I use that word, because I watched them as they came of age, coming 15, 16 years old, getting their first tatau on their shoulder or on their chest. And it was just such a cool thing to observe because, not only is tattoos, in America, like, I don't know, for me, in my family at least, it was like a very like, oh, you do that when you're an adult type of thing. It's kind of like a more restricted thing. But in this culture, it's like, nope, once you hit this age, you got to get your first one. And it was just such a cool thing because I feel like that's a very important part of culture around the world, is a rite of passage, a connectivity to the ancestors that's still alive today. I just thought that was very cool to observe. And in honor of that, essentially, as I was growing, I decided to kind of do something similar. But honestly, like I said, I began to deep dive into my own heritage and into my history and learning. I know I've talked a lot about the Taino and the Arawaks and all that stuff, but obviously the African contribution to my family is very important to me as well. And I'm very proud of my West African ancestry. And so I decided to get kolo scars on my chest and my abdomen. And kolo is a type of tattoo that is basically just scarification. So I'm sure you're familiar with that, tribal scarification marks. Essentially, I decided to get some done on me in the traditional fashion, no anesthesia, no nothing, just, razor to the skin. And you're not supposed to really show too much emotion and things like that during it, because you have to kind of prove yourself worthy of having that protection, because that's what it's going to bestow on you, is protection. And each marking, however you'd want to display it, is significant to you, and it kind of resonates with your own, what you want it to mean. And essentially the protection aspect of it comes from you not showing any pain during the process. Anyways, that was something I was inspired by, was the tattoo at the coming of age, and seeing that across the cultures. I know in Aotearoa, I think I said that right, they do the moko tattoo and stuff like that, and I always thought that was really cool too. But like I've been saying, it's just really cool to see this deep cultural connection that a lot of Polynesians have with their traditions. Even after colonization, even after the introduction of monotheistic religion and all of that, it's cool to still see that they're not letting their traditions die with, their newly found religion or anything like that. I'm not judging anybody for what they believe in. I know a lot of Polynesians are very religious people, and I'm not knocking that at all. I have my beliefs. I believe in honoring my ancestors and things of the sort. But of course, I respect everybody's views. But for me, it's just a beautiful thing to see that impact did not take away those cultural practices passed down, like in the Caribbean and many other parts of the world, unfortunately. And as my adult life continues, I will continue to be mislabeled a Polynesian. But the great thing about it is that at this point, I wear it as somewhat of a badge of honor, because if I had to be associated with some other group of people or whatever, I'm not going to be upset that people think I'm Polynesian, because to me, Polynesian people have always been some of the greatest people I've ever met, some of the nicest people I've ever met, and some of the most culturally sound people that I've ever interacted with. And I'm so happy to have had that interaction and have learned so much from their history and their culture. And like I said, without them, I would not be doing what I'm doing now. I would not be so deep into my own cultural understanding and genetic understanding and all of the things that I'm really into in terms of history and just trying to revive the old ways of life and understanding, respecting the planet and all of those things. It wouldn't be without those interactions I had when I was surrounded by, the Polynesian community. So thank you to all of those people, and thank you to all of the people in the Pacific that are still keeping on to their traditions, are still speaking their native languages. I have a lot of respect for all of you. And also, before I finish this video, special thanks to Ika Ika Crafts for this Koa Makau. It's a fish hook necklace, and if you know, you know the significance of this. It's again, just showing that appreciation for the ancestors and those that came before us, and those that paved the way for people to build, civilization in some of the hardest places to reach and some of the hardest places to find. Like the Pacific Islands. It's not easy, but these people sailed across the ocean and found all these islands and populated them and built agricultural systems and all these things. One of the most impressive things in all of human history, if you ask me. But anyways, thank you guys for watching this video. I hope you liked this video. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. I'll see you on the next one. Keep tapping into your roots. I say.